a few things. I would say that people think they're self-aware, but often they're not as self-aware as they think they are. What I mean by that is, we know as coaches, there are some really best practice tools and methodologies out there. I would never coach somebody unless I give them a behavioral assessment. And I do have a preference. I use a tool called the Predictive Index, or PI. It's been around since 1955. The reason I use it, it easily translates into a person's natural leadership style, not just in terms of who they are behaviorally. The other real reason I like PI is there's been 400 studies to demonstrate the accuracy and the validity of the tool. So it's actually one of the most accurate behavioral assessments in the world. And the fact it takes 7 minutes, it's 2.5 pages, so it's concise, it's easy, and it's a free choice instrument. So not to get too technical, it's a positive experience for a person taking PI.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets, the podcast where we talk with successful career coaches on how they built their success and the hard lessons they learned along the way. My name is Davis Nguyen, and I'm the founder of Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, and even $100,000 weeks. Before Purple Circle, I've grown several 7- and 8-figure career coaching businesses myself, and have been a consultant at 2 career coaching businesses that are doing over $100 million each. Whether you're an established coach or building your practice for the first time, you'll discover the secrets to elevating your coaching business.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets Podcast. I'm Kevin, and today we are joined by Chuck Mollor. He is the founder of MCG Partners, been in business for 18 plus years. Welcome to the show, Chuck.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm excited to be here and having some really good, meaningful conversation with you.
I'm excited to hear about your story. And every good story, there's an origin story, there's a lore. So I'm so curious, how did you become a coach and eventually turn into the business it is now?
My career has been essentially management consulting. After undergrad, I started process for engineering work for a year. Then I got into change management, which I did for a number of years. Then I wanted to do strategy consulting. So I like to experiment, which is not really very traditional, by the way, in management consulting. Typically, a person stays in one area and they kind of stick there. Yeah, I was sort of unorthodox. I wanted to move around and experience and, just try to figure out what my journey was, what my path. But in that progression, I continue to advance in my career, continue to take on more responsibility, project management, team management, practice management. And then I got into the leadership development space and talent management space. And I eventually was running a global practice at this company. And one day my CEO pulled me in and said, Chuck, you ever had a 360 assessment? And this is back in 1999. And I said, no, why are you asking? Which is obviously a pretty comical question if you really think about it, because there's a reason he wanted to know if I had ever had a 360. So he wanted me to have a 360. Clearly, he was getting some feedback that maybe there were some issues. And so I had my first and probably actually only at least written 360 assessment. And, there's some very positive things in there, but there's some very, very tough things. I got some very tough feedback that I was frankly shocked by and surprised by. And, feedback in itself is a whole nother conversation. But to answer your question, we sat down and of course my reaction was, I shouldn't say of course, but my reaction was half kidding, well, kind of screw, everybody because look all my great results. And, he laughed, and thankfully he was a very patient and accepting CEO, but also a mentor to me. Essentially, the feedback was I'm very good at the management part of my job. I'm not very good at the leadership part of my job. And I can reflect back, Kevin, and realize that my lack of self-awareness was the size of the Grand Canyon, because I thought I was self-aware, but I really had no real understanding of how I was perceived by my key people, not only direct reports, but really people in the organization. So, he looked at me and he said, look, Chuck, you're always going to be successful. You're smart, you're hardworking. I had the largest practice in the company, the most profitable practice in the company. He said, you're always going to be successful. You care about people. But as I just mentioned, you understand the management part of your job. You don't really understand the leadership part of your job. And if you want to get to the next level in your career, not only as an executive, but maybe as a CEO. And I was actually one of the successors to him for being the next CEO. He said, you really need to really embrace that. So I kind of went away, and we know that ego and pride can get in the way of these kind of situations. And I finally, put my ego, my pride, and my defensiveness aside and said, no, really, I am motivated to get the next level. But honestly, I just really wanted to be better. I took the feedback very personally and to heart. but I quickly transitioned to say, what do I need to do to really become an effective leader? Now, I never got an executive coach, but I started really investing in leadership. I started taking leadership development programs. I started reading. I really became a student of leadership. And frankly, I still am. That journey hasn't stopped. And then a year and a half later, I became the CEO of that company. And it was a global mid-size, firm in the leadership development, talent management space. That's how I kind of started my journey as a leader. So fast forward to 18 and a half years ago, my company, which was owned by a holding company, got acquired twice in 1 year, which is, anyone's ever been through that, that's a pretty intense time frame. And fortunately, I did the transition. Both companies wanted me, but I was now an executive in a very, very much larger, company than the company I was running. And frankly, it just wasn't really the right fit for me. I like more entrepreneurial roles, but frankly, I actually like being a CEO. So I decided to start my own firm. And in that journey, I reflected on the story I just told you. And I thought, you know what, becoming an executive coach is something that always seemed to be make sense for me with my experience and my background and that journey of leadership that I just shared with you. So I became an executive coach in addition to starting this company 18 and a half years ago. So I've been kind of created my own job description. I've been coaching executives and executive teams in addition to owning and running this company for the last 18 and a half years.
18 and a half years is quite a long time. And so I guess there's a lot of different types of executives. Did you everybody talks about ideal client profiles.
Right.
Was there a specific type of executive that you kind of helped out and all that?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and we all have different personalities, including not only the people we work with, the clients we have, but also as coaches, right? Some of us as coaches definitely are more comfortable working with certain personality types than others. For me, I really like variety. I like working with many different types of leaders with different styles and different personalities and different challenges. I would say, though, that if there's a call where people think of me, is that really, alpha male or female leader that, is having a hard time receiving feedback, having a hard time understanding what's success for them as a leader. And they need a coach who's going to really be able to work with them and be patient with them, but also can be really straight with them and give them some tough love, in an effective way, in an empathetic way. So I think that is something I usually get a call when I'm working with a CEO or an executive that has that type of profile. But honestly, I really enjoy working with so many different types of leaders. I worked with leaders that are very, very easygoing and laid back and very reserved and introverted and analytical. I worked with leaders with huge personalities that are very outgoing and take over a room. So, I have leaders that are, technical experts that became CEOs, whether a PhD or an engineer. I've worked with CEOs that come out of sales and marketing and the creative side of the world. So I enjoy that. That's just my personality. I get bored very easily, Kevin. So, which is the reason I created my job description the way it is. I like multitasking. I like working with different types of people and backgrounds. I find that very, very interesting. I enjoy hearing about people's journey, not just as a professional, but as a person. It's a very powerful thing to get to know a person at that level.
One interesting thing, you shared your story about being kind of that alpha leader, right? And so
Yes, I did.
I'm kind of curious, like these executives that you work with, do you notice some common patterns of the symptoms they're going through or the problems that they're kind of experiencing?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. I would say a few things. I would say that people think they're self-aware, but often they're not as self-aware as they think they are. What I mean by that is, we know as coaches, there are some really best practice tools and methodologies out there. I would never coach somebody unless I give them a behavioral assessment. And I do have a preference. I use a tool called the Predictive Index, or PI. It's been around since 1955. The reason I use it, it easily translates into a person's natural leadership style, not just in terms of who they are behaviorally. The other real reason I like PI is there's been 400 studies to demonstrate the accuracy and the validity of the tool. So it's actually one of the most accurate behavioral assessments in the world. And the fact it takes 7 minutes, it's 2.5 pages, so it's concise, it's easy, and it's a free choice instrument. So not to get too technical, it's a positive experience for a person taking PI. Most behavioral assessments are forced choice instruments. meaning that there's a statement or sentence and you're forced to choose between A and D. Now, if you ever take an assessment, Kevin, that's a forced choice instrument. Even if you're not analytical, you look at the answers and say, wait a minute, I agree with 80% of A, and I agree with 20% of C. And so you walk away from that assessment saying, how can this be 100% accurate if I don't 100% agree with all my answers? So with PI, that's not the case. But without that deep dive there, so I definitely give a behavioral assessment because the people need to understand not just who they are behaviorally, but what motivates and drives them. And how does that translate to not only who they are as a manager and a leader, but also how do they approach their work and how they approach working with other people. And PI provides some really incredible insights to that. The other thing that I also do is do a verbal 360. So it's an interview. In other words, I don't like to do a written 360, not to say they're not accurate, but people tend to be much more insightful and open when you're having a conversation with them versus having them fill out a form. So to answer your question, the insights that I receive, not only as a coach, but helping that leader improve their awareness of not only who they are at a sort of a natural level, which is what Predictive Index does, but also understand how they're perceived as a leader by their key stakeholders, which is the verbal 360, which I translate into a report, including how do they see themselves. So like a written 360, as we know, there is that self-assessment in addition to how others see you. In the verbal 360 experience, I also have that executive self-assess to compare how they think they are versus how others see them.
Really interesting stuff. But I'm kind of curious, these executives, right? How do they typically find you? What does your marketing kind of look like?
Yeah, so as you know, coaching has changed tremendously over the last, 20, 30 years. I've been in the coaching leadership development space really since, the late 90s, as I mentioned earlier, and it's changed. There are a lot more coaches. There's a much more interest in coaching, and there's really different types of coaching. So we are a B2B firm. In other words, we market our services of executive coaching, and we do a lot of leadership development, manager training. We're kind of a full service firm. So we market those services to companies of all sizes, of all industries. So the companies are the ones who hire us. Now, what's changed in the last 10 plus years, probably 15 years, is what I call the B2C market, business to consumer. So there's now, websites and portals where coaches are marketing themselves and individuals are interested in hiring coaches, not just executive coaches or leadership coaches, but life coaches, career coaches. So coaching's expanded to now be for people, individuals, to be able to hire coaches. So we're not in that space, we're in the business to business space. So companies are hiring us to coach their executives.
How do they find you though? Is it mostly through like referrals? What kind of like?
Yes, we are referred to by companies that have good experience with us. And I have a number of coaches. I have over 25 coaches in addition to myself. So combination of our methodology, sort of our value proposition of how we coach is definitely a factor. And then when a company has a good experience, yes, they refer to us to be people in their network. And then also when we have clients that move to another company, they also hire us. But we're also proactively reaching out to companies to introduce ourselves and our services as well.
How do you reach out to them typically? Is it through like more traditional types of like traditional methods, or is it more like through LinkedIn and all that?
No, it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, I do have a sales team that are doing a combination of professional associations, targeting companies directly within their HR organization or their executive team or their CEO. We also do a lot of thought leadership, Kevin. So we write articles, we write blogs, we do podcasts like yours here today. We're just starting a YouTube channel, so we're in the early stages of doing that. We're kind of behind that a little bit, where we're just sharing thought leadership in terms of, specific areas of where we focus and the work we're doing, whether it's around, executive coaching, leadership development, succession planning. I mean, again, we do a lot of different things in the leadership space. So it's a combination of all those things. I speak at conferences, I speak at leadership offsites. So there's a number of things that we do to kind of get exposure to companies.
Something I'm very, very curious about. So, okay, now that we have a good idea of the marketing and who you target, I'm kind of curious about what a coaching engagement looks like. You mentioned you have 25 coaches. Do you guys mostly do one-on-one coaching, group trainings? Like, there's so many different modalities. Which ones have you
Yeah,
gravitated to?
no, it's a fair question again. It's the team coaching is becoming more popular the last few years. We don't really do a lot of that. We kind of differentiate leadership development with a team versus necessarily coaching. Now, what I will say that we do is that when we do often now a leadership program for an executive team, each of those members of the executive team get an executive coach. So we like the idea of a combination of coaching and a leadership team program. But most of our coaching programs are one-on-one, literally 99%. The average, I would say, or the starting length of a coaching program would be 6 months. Sometimes we're 9 months, sometimes we're 12 months. I would say probably 30, 40% of the time, 6 month coaching program will get extended beyond 6 months. Occasionally, we will do a short program around 3 months. But most executive programs start at 6 months.
What do you think it is about the 6 month mark that makes it kind of like?
It's become sort of the industry norm in a lot of ways, at least the B2B side of coaching. And there's really a couple of reasons. And there's some research out there that sort of, I would say, roughly validates that. By no means is it a science. And what I mean by that is, some of it's the combination of improving a person's self-awareness, identifying top 2 or 3 areas for development, and then working on those things, and the time frame to be able to do all that and start showing a cadence of development improvement, and all the work that you have to do to kind of get there, including the assessments we talked about earlier, is going to be about a 6 month time frame. The goal is to be able to give a person enough tools and knowledge and skills and strategies that once you go away, they continue their journey. Because as I always tell all my clients, 6 months is the beginning of your journey. The journey is not going to stop for you. My goal is to get you set up for success and, yes, have an impact and identify those opportunities and come up with a plan to address those opportunities. But your development is going to continue. 6 months is really the beginning of that journey. So I think having that mindset and preparing your client for that mindset is really critical.
Now, a lot of things that you talked about, you being in the industry, I'd like your advice on something. Something I
Okay.
noticed about a lot of coaches is that they struggle with things like pricing themselves. And a lot of the things that we kind of talked about, what makes it so hard, what I've noticed on this podcast is that value can be quite subjective, especially with things like leadership and all that, because it's not like marketing and sales. There's no like hard KPIs for that, I guess. And so, of course, you don't have to give any hard numbers, but when you were kind of structuring your pricing, how did you go about charging, like coming up with the initial numbers of charging your engagements?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. I mean, I'm fortunate because I come out of consulting, and because I was running a consulting business and running a firm before I started my firm, I'm very familiar with how to pricing models and margins and cost and labor and, all the other expenses that go into pricing. I think most coaches out there are individual coaches that set up their own shop, and sometimes they farm themselves out to other firms. A lot of coaches are doing one-on-one work with individuals that are hiring them. So I think the individual coaching pricing is going to be very different than company pricing, meaning when companies are hiring you to coach. If you're working with individuals, I mean, at minimum, I would never go lower than $150 an hour. I probably would go with an hourly price. Most coaches are hoping to get around $200, $250 an hour. And I'm talking about leadership coaching, right? Because there's, career coaching would be a little bit lower than that, honestly. It depends on the level of the person. It depends on, frankly, what investment are they making, not just in terms of price, but also the commitment to development. It's a little different. When a person's hiring you, they're interested, and they're going to be obviously a lot more price sensitive than a company hiring you. But they're also probably curious, but they're also made the decision this is probably what they want to do. And so coming up with clear expectations and deliverables is even more critical for an individual hiring you than a company, even though you have to do that for the company as well. The pricing is going to be, frankly, less when an individual hires you. It's coming out of their own pocket. But I would be using anywhere from 150, frankly, some people go up to 350, 500 an hour. There really is no set range. Even in the B2B coaching, means some coaching engagements, could be substantially higher than that. I mean, I know some of the best coaches in the world. I mean, they're charging $50,000 to $100,000 for a coaching engagement, whereas some coaches are charging 10, 15,000 or 5,000, or so there's really a huge range out there. But if you're an individual coach, I think a fair goal is saying, what do I think my value is? How much coaching experience do I have? what level of coaching am I doing? Am I coaching at the director level, the VP level, the C level? I mean, that's going to impact, I think, what you charge. And then, most coaching engagements, when you add it all up, is probably going to be for a 6-month coaching engagement, probably looking around anywhere from 30 to 40 hours, right? So you should be able to be prepared to sort of forecast, how often am I meeting with this client, which typically I would recommend at least every 2 weeks, have good cadence. And then, prepping to do the behavioral assessment, the cost of the behavioral assessment, doing the verbal 360, how many interviews, writing the report, and then providing content, right? Because, I'm going to give you a question, which is coaching has really changed in my lifetime. It used to be 100% behavioral based, and a lot of coaches today are still behaviorally focused. But a lot of coaching today is about leadership effectiveness, leadership knowledge, skills, and capabilities. And that there's a price to expertise, right? You have to be confident to be able to say, I'm not just here to help you behaviorally, but I'm here to actually help you develop as a leader from a leadership effectiveness. Now, frankly, there may be some coaches out there that don't have that expertise. So you have to be honest with yourself who you are and who you're not, and where do you want to go? What's your journey in terms of how you want to develop your brand and what your expertise is going to be? It's important to be able to do that.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I've done this podcast quite a few times, and there's been some experimental pricing models I've heard. I've heard someone kind of do value-based pricing, and I've actually heard one of the coaches I recently interviewed, he actually did coaching in exchange for equity, of Tesla, SpaceX, and Hyperloop and stuff, which was insane. Have you ever experimented with any pricing
We
models?
haven't, but you're right. There are some coaches out there, and frankly, give them credit if you can financially do that as if you're an individual coach, which most, as I said, most
Mm,
coaches are individual coaches. They don't work for a company. They're on their own. If you're open-minded and flexible enough, whether it's stock, an equity in a startup, or a company that's willing to give you equity versus cash, that's definitely an
yeah.
opportunity. I mean, there are coaches that charge a premium that say, I don't have the right impact on your coaching in setting up that sort of criteria, then I'm going to give you money back. That's a risky, a proposition, because that's very subjective unless you come up with agreed upon criteria that takes as much subjectivity out of it as possible. So I think that there are creative ways of doing it. Most companies we work with are pretty fixed on how they want to price out coaching. And just so you know, from a B2B standpoint, we don't do hourly rates. We do a flat fee.
Something I'm also really interested about is how do you think about your client capacity? Because you have 25 coaches right now, and as that number goes up, you're not an individual coach, right? So it becomes, I can imagine it becomes a lot harder and stuff. How do you guys manage your client capacity?
No, again, fair question. I would say that, for me personally, just because I run and own a company, I probably don't usually have any more than 5 active, clients that I'm working with. I think if you're a
Mhm.
full-time executive coach, that number could obviously be a lot higher. But I
Mhm.
think if you're really going to be an effective coach, that's a really important question. What is your capacity? Because there's a lot of work you need to do besides the actual coaching meetings and research and getting out there and networking and marketing yourself, and frankly investing in your own effectiveness. I think we as coaches need to continue to develop our coaching skills and coaching capabilities. So you have to create time for learning and development for yourself. So I don't know what the right number is. Some people, it depends how many hours you want to work, honestly. Some people, coaching is a part-time thing. Some people are semi-retired. Some people are starting their coaching journey in their 30s or their 40s, or even in their 50s, and they're doing it full time. And depending on what your rate is, you've got to come up with a number that says, how much coaching work do I need to have to be able to earn the living I want to make for a year? So I think there needs to be an honest sort of conversation with yourself about what's my earning goal, if you have one. Some people, again, if you're semi-retired or retired, maybe that's not a high priority. So I think what's your earning objective, and that should cascade by what you're charging, what your volume of coaching is. But I would say that when you start having more than 15, 20 active coaches at the same time, you're getting to a dangerous area where it's going to be hard for you to really be effective with individual leaders and their unique needs. That's a lot of volume to manage, I think, if you go beyond that at any given time.
You said something really interesting too. You're saying that some people have this as a lifestyle business, and something I'm very curious about yourself is that you've been in the game for about 18 years. And so where do you kind of want this coaching business to take you in the next few years? Do you have desires to scale? Did you kind of want to wind it down? Do you have secret dreams no one knows about? Curious about that.
That's a good question because I'm definitely not a young man anymore, or a young person, I should say. No, I'm definitely near the latter end of my career. I've been working for now 42 years. So give you some context. I've had very open conversations with my team because I've got people who've been working with me for over 10 years. My number two's been working with me for 15 and a half years. So, I guess the good news for them is I have no interest in retiring or selling the company. I've had open conversations. If I get to that point, I will talk to them openly about, and I'm talking my core team, my permanent team, about what my plans are. This is where I think you have to be really honest with yourself about who you are and self-understanding and self-awareness and what makes sense to you. I know for me that yes, I would like to start slowing down at some point for all the reasons. I also have a teenager. My youngest of four kids is still 14. I had him right before I turned 50, to get and give you context. I was in my late 40s. I was 48 when I had him. So he's just a freshman in high school. And so I could tell you minimally I'm working full time for the next 4 years. But honestly, I really love what I do. I'm not really sure what retirement means for me. I'm not really sure I'm the retire type. I don't know if I could ever stop working completely. So I don't know what my future would look like. I mean, I definitely would slow down. I mean, I could potentially just turn the reins over to my number two and have her run the company when I actually slow down, and maybe I just still coach, and I'll coach either full-time or part-time. I can see myself continuing to coach. I've written a leadership book, just so you know that, Kevin. I'm actually starting to write a second one probably at the end of this month. I could see myself continuing to write, continuing to do podcasts, continue to speak at conferences if they'll have me as I get older. So I'm pretty passionate about this space. So I see myself continuing this journey as I'm able to do it, as I stay healthy. So that's kind of how I see my journey right now. And what happens to the business, it depends on really, my number two's interest. And then if there is an opportunity maybe to sell it, but that's really probably the last option for me. I'm not looking to actively sell my company.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I always like, especially for the people that have been in business for quite a while, I always love kind of hearing about their next plans. And it sounds like you're still kind of figuring it out, and it'll probably reveal itself over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends who retired at 50, at 55. I've got people who say, I'm done. I don't want to work anymore. And so I think you have to be really honest with yourself. And yes, what are their financial goals you have, but lifestyle goals. But you have to be honest about what makes sense for you, what's happiness for you, and what motivates and drives you on a personal level, not just on a professional level.
Outside looking in, it seems like everything's going pretty smooth. Just curious, if we were to take a look under the hood, right? What are some challenges that you're noticing in your business now or in the past that were kind of like unexpected? Like most people wouldn't expect these challenges. What are some things that come to mind?
Yeah, I would say that the market used to be a little bit more predictable. The economy used to be a little bit more predictable, but I think we're entering an era, especially with AI. There's a lot of unpredictability, not only the impact that it has on coaching and the value of coaching and the utilization of coaching. Some people don't even know that AI has been around for over 20 years. It's not new. It's just starting to be at the level of sophistication where it's being utilized in business today. I mean, this could be in itself a podcast, but right now, what we're starting, the early stages are companies are restructuring their businesses where they're using AI to eliminate a lot of entry level positions, a lot of what I call operational customer service processing jobs, because now the level of artificial intelligence allows you to do that. So if you haven't already been paying attention to the news, meaning your audience, that you're already seeing announcements of layoffs, restructures. Now, some of it are for other reasons, but much of it is being driven by AI because companies are restructuring. If you're a recent college graduate, most of them know right now it's hard to get a job because there are not a lot of entry-level positions out there due to how AI is impacting organizations from an efficiency, productivity, and then also job profiling. So we're in the early stages of this, and there's many other facets of how AI is impacting business. But so that's really a huge factor. But when you think about the cycles of change, the cycles of innovation, companies are constantly dealing with headwinds they've never dealt with before in terms of competition, technology impact, their ability to price their services. The inflation that we went through for 4 years had a really substantial impact. So this is the problem with inflation, right? We all saw how grocery prices went up for 4 years, cost of gas, even though that's come down, but the cost of going out to have a meal, right? Now, inflation has dramatically dropped over the last 6 to 12 months, but the problem is prices have stayed the same. right? You can't go out and get a burger, and fries and a soda without spending $50. That used to be $25, right? Literally the price of a meal going out right now is doubled. And I'm sure everyone's experienced that. And the reason why is this relative? Because the point is it's created a huge impact to everything from logistics to manufacturing to supply chain to goods, consumer demand and interest, and the impact impacts business. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the instability in business right now, to me, is an all-time high. There's really no predictability about how a company is going to budget and spend and invest in their people in their organizations. And again, I'm a business to business business. So there's really no predictability. I'll give you a real example is that look at the stock market. Stock market is having a record year. Every week there's an all-time high. You would think historically the stock market reflects the healthy economy. Unemployment is relatively low. There's great job growth. Yet I can tell you, if you talk to anybody in the consulting business, including our industry, leadership development, executive coaching, you'll find, yes, there is demand, but we're working twice as hard to get the same amount of business as we did a year ago. And it's been going on for at least 12 months. So there's lots of headwinds and uncertainty in terms of how companies are willing and able to invest, in their people and their talent and in their leadership. So we're seeing a lot of inconsistency, a lot of delays in decision making in the business world today, based upon many of the reasons I just mentioned.
If you were to make a prediction, what do you think will happen?
Over the years, we've seen patterns. That's the interesting thing. There really isn't a pattern right now, Kevin. I wish I could tell you, the global markets, the US market, if anything, the tariff strategy, and again, I'm not trying to get into politics, but the tariff strategy, believe it or not, for the most part, has had a really positive impact on the economy, but it also created a lot of instability because the policy was constantly changing or being negotiated. I think the price of everything has had a huge impact on companies' ability to be profitable and their reluctance to create consistency on their budget and their investment in people. So what we've been seeing is sort of like a roller coaster the last 12 plus months, almost a year and a half, in terms of companies saying, yep, we're in, or no, we're going to delay it, or we're going to delay it again. So I wish I could give you a crystal ball to say what the next 12 months are going to look like. I really don't have an answer to that. I think it's important to create stability for you as a business and for you as a person, because the good news is, we are busy, we are having a good year. The historical indicators, economic indicators that would predict where a business is going are not predicting that, I guess, is my bottom answer. So it just creates a lot of uncertainty, and you have to be able to manage through that.
And so this will be the final section. We're going to skip over one of the games. It's one of my favorite ones, but we're going to play this game instead.
All right.
I think it's way more valuable. It's called Overrated, Underrated. And as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you've probably gotten a lot of advice. Probably some of it good, probably some of it bad, some of it solicited, probably 99.9% of it unsolicited. And so I'm kind of curious, what's the most overrated piece of business advice you've gotten so far? And what's the most underrated?
I think overrated advice would be, how big to be, right? Because I think that's really it's a combination of what your skill set is, what your capability is really where do you want to be? What are your personal professional goals? So what I mean by that, for example, I was running a global firm. I was running national businesses. When I started this business, I could have easily gone that direction. I didn't, because I really had at the time 3 young daughters, and I wanted to balance my personal life with my professional life. And I also wanted to become an executive coach. So that was a very personal decision, not necessarily based upon my capability, because I could have built a national or global, business. So I made more of a personal lifestyle choice. So I think the overrated is, oh, you could be this size, what's your business plan? And, so I think that's a personal decision. The underrated is, branding, meaning, really what is your value proposition? What do you want to be known for? Whether it's an individual or a combination of an individual and as a business. I mean, the reality is we live in a world because of social media, the internet, phones, mobile phones, where we're constantly bombarded with information, and so are businesses, so are individuals. And you need to make sure that the clarity of who you are and what you provide can resonate literally within 10 to 15 seconds. Most people are not going to look at you or your information or your website probably more they're going to make up their mind literally in 10 seconds if they want to continue to go down the path and learn more about you. So is your messaging articulate and clear enough and crisp enough where people are going to say, I'm interested to learn more than those 10 seconds? If there's any advice I would give to anyone out here that's a coach, is there real clarity? Because I think the challenge is we all try to be everything to everybody. I think the challenge with us sometimes is that going to be effective enough in a very, very competitive landscape, which coaching today is probably as competitive as it's ever been because of, the surge of people who've gotten into the profession over the last 10 years.
Last question for you, Chuck. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Sure. So they can find me at our website, which is mcgpartners.com. I also have an individual website because of the book I wrote I mentioned earlier, which is chuckmollor.com, and it's Mollor. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and you can also email me if you need to reach me.
Oh, sorry. Did you mention your book?
Yeah, I didn't mention it. So the title of the book is The Rise of the Agile Leader. Can You Make the Shift? Which I wrote a few years ago.
Who should read that book?
Well, there's two aspects of the book. One is to talk about a new leadership model we created about 5 years ago because leadership has changed tremendously. So we talk about that. We're very open. We give the leadership model itself to people. And then the majority of the book is really focusing on, as any level of leader, what do you need to do to get to the next level as a leader? What are the particular skills, knowledge, behaviors are really going to allow you, whether you're a new leader, a mid-level leader, or an executive or C-level executive, to get to as a leader. So that was like the purpose of my book, and I've tried to be very, very practical. So even if you're a coach, and let's say that your leadership expertise you're looking to develop and improve, I would recommend it. It's going to help. There's stuff in there at a very practical level that provides techniques and strategies to help you be even a better coach.
Chuck, as I'm reviewing my 5 pages of notes I took on my iPad with my really bad doctor handwriting, a phrase that you said earlier, there's a price to expertise, and it's very, very clear to me that you paid that price. I thought it was very, very interesting right from the beginning. You were telling me how you were, and then when that mentor asked you about the 360 assessment, it's really interesting to see how far you've come since those times. I just really want to thank you for sharing all your experience with pricing models, developing your coaching practice. Honestly, I think a lot of people listening would be really, really inspired about how you actually have 25 coaches under your belt. And you mentioned kind of like the challenges where there's all these new technologies of AI and just a lot of uncertainty happening. So also your overrated, underrated advice was really, really solid, especially with the value prop and branding. It's probably more important than ever since everybody's also trying to get better with their branding as well. So anyways, Chuck, that's a long-winded way of saying the work that you do is really, really important. Yeah, I just want to say it matters, and I appreciate you for coming on our podcast, Chuck. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for having me. Hopefully it was helpful.
That's it for this episode of Career Coaching Secrets. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this episode to catch future episodes. This podcast was brought to you by Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, or even $100,000 weeks, all without burning out and making sure that you're making the impact and having the life that you want. To learn more about our community and how we can help you, visit joinpurplecircle.com.